Welcome to our midweek check-in as we conclude our three-part series on living for an audience of one. We've been looking at giving, praying and fasting. And today I want to conclude the midweek check-in by looking at some practical tips for fasting and how we can make it a part of our regular rhythm of life. I wonder how you've responded to the notion of fasting. Maybe you've screwed up your face and thought, well, that's really not for me. I'm happy to pray, I'm happy to give, but really fasting's a bit outdated. Well, I just draw your attention to the fact that Jesus said, when you give, when you pray, when you fast. It struck me when I first read those words that it's not an if, but a when. He assumed that his followers would do what he did, which was to give to the needy, to pray regularly to the Father, and to spend time in fasting. In fact, we see that Jesus' public ministry begins with 40 days in the wilderness in which he abstains from eating food. But fasting, like all the other things that Jesus did, wasn't about rule keeping, it was about relationship building. And so I want to invite you to begin small, to look at ways in which you can begin to experiment with fasting. As a young Christian, one of the things that encouraged and inspired me was my friendship with a bloke called Brad. And Brad was an enthusiast. Whatever he did it joyfully, and he embraced it, not as something that he was obliged to do, but something that he did because he believed God had commanded it for the purpose of helping him to grow more like Jesus and to grow closer to God. And so Brad's enthusiasm and joyful embracing of fasting was something that inspired me and encouraged me to persevere with something which, to be honest, I wasn't really enthusiastic about at the beginning. And I remember Brad saying to me, I love my food. I don't find fasting easy. But I do find that when I engage with it, I draw closer to God. It might be that you begin by choosing to abstain from one meal, just once. But I would encourage you that the benefits of fasting come not from what we give up, but what we do instead. And so I mentioned that fasting is being described as putting off the visible to put on the invisible. When we take time out from food or fasting from something else, it might be social media, it might be TV, then we also need to consciously and intentionally fill that void with something else that points us toward God. It might be worship music, it might be going for a walk and praying, it might be spending time in silence. But we need to balance up what we're doing, not simply in terms of abstaining from one thing, but embracing something else that will help us to draw near to God. What might that be for you this week? What has it been already, perhaps? One of the things that I've taken to doing regularly on an annual basis is a couple of times a year to switch off from social media, from Facebook, Instagram, too much time scrolling my news feed to see what's happening in the world. And instead of just stopping those things, I've looked for ways to consciously spend that time giving more attention to God. I might open my verse of the day at the moment when I was going to flick on to Facebook and just ponder what God says to me through that particular passage of Scripture. It might be I take an extra moment in my day to spend time praying for people who matter to me or causes that have grabbed my attention. And so I'm not simply emptying out some space, I'm filling it with something meaningful that helps me give attention to God, to focus on the things that matter to God. The essence of this series that we've been looking at on spiritual disciplines has been about how we can draw closer to God, not about keeping rules, not about denying ourselves, but seeking to do what Jesus did, put aside the things that distract us to focus on the things that matter more. And so giving, praying, fasting are all spiritual disciplines that are built around the notion, the recurring theme that Jesus gives us of living for an audience of one, believing that even though God is unseen, our Father who sees in secret, who knows our needs, who hears our prayers, is the one that we can turn to. You might remember from Sunday, if you tuned in, that we looked at Isaiah 58 and the importance of abstaining from pointing the finger at others, from complaining and grumbling. What might that look like? What might that free up in your life this week, today, this month, as you focus your attention on the goodness of God, on the provision of God, on the forgiveness of God, as we saw last week? I invite you to take time in the remainder of this week to implement some of those strategies where fasting is not simply about stopping from eating food, but taking time to remember the goodness of God, to seek the forgiveness of God, to offer it to others, to be more gracious, to be less critical, and to trust in the foundational belief that God is with you and for you and enables you to live more like Jesus as a result. Hope that's been helpful. Hope the rest of the week goes well for you, and look forward to catching up with you on Sunday as we move into October. Where did the first month of spring go? God bless you. Thanks for listening.